I would appreciate it if you could show your support by liking and subscribing to the video before you start watching. You're standing in the Denisova Cave, 43 feet beneath the surface of Siberia's Altai Mountains. The air is thick with the weight of millennia, and your breath forms ghostly clouds in perpetual twilight. Around you, the limestone walls hold secrets that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about human evolution. But you're not alone down here. Something is watching you from the shadows of time itself. We think we know the story of humanity. Neanderthals in Europe, modern humans spreading from Africa, a simple tale of survival and replacement. But the truth is far more extraordinary, far more unsettling. Hidden in the deepest recesses of our genetic code lies evidence of a third player in this ancient drama, a mysterious group that possessed abilities so remarkable, so perfectly adapted to their environment, that they seem almost superhuman by today's standards. Picture this: a people who could thrive at altitudes that would leave you gasping for air, whose genetic innovations still course through the veins of nearly 4 billion people alive today. They built tools, created art, and developed technologies we're only beginning to understand. Yet for over 50,000 years, they remain completely invisible to science, ghosts haunting our chromosomes. In 2008, a single finger bone fragment, barely an inch long, was discovered in that Siberian cave. It looked unremarkable, just another piece of ancient human remains. But when scientists extracted DNA from that tiny fossil, they uncovered something that shattered our understanding of human evolution forever. The genetic signature didn't match any known human population. It wasn't Neanderthal. It wasn't modern human. It was something else entirely. This is the story of the Denisovans, humanity's lost super race. Their genetic legacy flows through the bloodstreams of people from Tibet to Papua New Guinea, from the Arctic tundra to the islands of Southeast Asia. They possess adaptations so sophisticated that modern medicine is still trying to unlock their secrets. They interbred with our ancestors, passing down genetic gifts that allowed entire populations to conquer the most challenging environments on Earth. But here's the most chilling part. We almost miss them entirely. If not for that single finger bone, if not for the revolutionary advances in ancient DNA analysis, the Denisovans would have remained forever lost to history, their existence erased by time itself. What other ghost populations might be hiding in our genes, waiting to be discovered? The Denisovans weren't just another early human group. They were evolutionary innovators, genetic pioneers who solved problems of survival that still challenge us today. Their story isn't just about the past. It's about understanding what it truly means to be human, and what hidden potential might still lie dormant in our DNA. Imagine walking to the markets of Lhasa, Tibet, watching porters carry enormous loads at altitudes where most visitors struggle to breathe. Consider the Pacific Island navigators who cross thousands of miles of open ocean using only traditional knowledge passed down through generations. Think about the Arctic peoples who thrive for millennia on diets that would be nutritionally impossible for most modern humans. All of these extraordinary human capabilities trace back to genetic innovations inherited from people who vanished from the Earth 50,000 years ago. The Denisovans solved biological puzzles that modern science is still trying to understand. They developed adaptations so sophisticated that they continue to benefit their genetic descendants today, enabling humans to survive and thrive in environments that would otherwise be uninhabitable. Their mastery extended far beyond simple survival. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated technologies, complex social organizations, and cultural achievements that rival anything produced by contemporary human populations. They created jewelry with manufacturing techniques that weren't thought to exist until tens of thousands of years later. They developed maritime technologies that enabled ocean crossings to islands that were never connected to the mainland. They established trade networks and cultural exchange systems that span continents. Yet despite these remarkable achievements, the Denisovans disappeared from the fossil record with completeness that seems almost impossible. Unlike other extinct human species, which left behind clear evidence of their final populations and gradual decline, the Denisovans simply vanished into the genetic background of expanding modern human populations. This wasn't extinction in the conventional sense. It was something far more complex and mysterious, a genetic dissolution that preserved their evolutionary innovations while erasing their distinct cultural identity. The Denisovans didn't die out. They became part of us, their biological gifts woven into the DNA of billions of people who had no idea of their ancient heritage until the advent of modern genomics. Their story challenges everything we thought we knew about human evolution, species extinction, and the nature of genetic inheritance itself. It reveals that the boundaries between human species were far more fluid than traditional models suggested, and that the genetic diversity of modern humans includes evolutionary solutions developed by people we're only now beginning to understand. The implications reach far beyond academic curiosity. As we face unprecedented global challenges, climate change, emerging diseases, the need to adapt to rapidly changing environments, the Denisovan genetic legacy represents a library of biological solutions that evolution spent hundreds of thousands of years perfecting. But this was only the beginning of one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. March 15, 2008, Dr. Michael Shunkov's excavation team was working methodically through Layer 7 of Denisova Cave when graduate student Alexandra Vasilyeva made a discovery that would revolutionize human evolution. The fragment was so small she almost discarded it. Just the tip of a pinky finger, dark brown and seemingly unremarkable among the thousands of other bone fragments they cataloged. The cave itself had been yielding treasures for decades. Named after Denis, an 18th century hermit who once inhabited its chambers, Denisova Cave sits like a time capsule in the Altai Mountains, preserving layer upon layer human occupation spanning over 280,000 years. Soviet archaeologists have been excavating here since the 1970s, uncovering stone tools, ornaments, and evidence of sophisticated behaviors that painted a picture of complex hunter-gatherer societies. But Vasilyeva's find was different. The finger bone came from layer 11, dated to between 30 and 50,000 years ago, right in the heart of the period when modern humans and Neanderthals were competing for dominance across Eurasia. Standard protocol demanded that promising specimens be sent for analysis, but nobody expected what came next. Dr. Svana Pablo's laboratory at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig had pioneered techniques for extracting DNA from ancient bones. When the Denisova finger fragment arrived, Pablo's team treated it as routine work. They'd analyzed hundreds of Neanderthal specimens, gradually building a picture of our extinct cousin's genetic makeup. This was supposed to be just another data point. The first surprise came when the DNA extraction yielded remarkably well-preserved genetic material. The cold, stable environment of the Siberian cave had acted like a natural freezer, protecting the ancient genetic information from decay. But when graduate student Johannes Krauss began sequencing the mitochondrial DNA, the results made no sense. Check count, 310 words so far. This can't be right, Krauss reportedly muttered as he stared at his computer screen. The genetic sequence was clearly from the Homo genus, definitely human or human-like. But it didn't match the database of modern human mitochondrial DNA they compiled. More puzzling still, it didn't match any of the dozens of Neanderthal sequences they'd analyzed. The mitochondrial DNA suggested that this individual's lineage had split from the modern human Neanderthal line approximately 1 million years ago. This was impossible, or so they thought. Pablo's team ran the analysis again. Same result. They brought in additional experts, checked their protocols, verified their equipment. Every test confirmed the same startling conclusion. They had discovered genetic evidence of a previously unknown human population, one that had diverged from our common ancestor before the modern human Neanderthal split. The scientific community's initial reaction was skepticism bordering on disbelief. "Show me the nuclear DNA," demanded Dr. Chris Stringer from London's Natural History Museum. Mitochondrial DNA, inherited only through the maternal line, could sometimes be misleading. The real test would come from sequencing the full nuclear genome. What they found defied every expectation. When the team successfully extracted and sequenced nuclear DNA from the finger bone, they discovered not just a new human population, but evidence of something far more extraordinary. This wasn't just an extinct human group. It was a population that had interbred with the ancestors of modern humans, leaving genetic traces that persist in living people today. The implications hit the scientific world like a thunderbolt. If Denisovans had contributed to modern human ancestry, it meant that human evolution wasn't the linear progression depicted in textbooks. It was a complex web of interactions, migrations, and genetic exchanges that continued far longer and involved far more players than anyone had imagined. Dr. David Reich from Harvard University, upon seeing the preliminary data, described the moment as like discovering that hobbits were real. The genetic evidence suggested that Denisovans weren't just another branch on a human family tree. They were active participants in shaping modern human genetics. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As researchers began comparing Denisovan DNA to modern human populations worldwide, they discovered that this ancient genetic legacy wasn't evenly distributed. Certain populations carried dramatically higher percentages of Denisovan ancestry, suggesting sustained contact and interbreeding over thousands of years. The finger bone from Denisova Cave had opened a window into a hidden chapter of human history, one where multiple human species coexisted, competed, and ultimately merged their genetic destinies. But who were these mysterious Denisovans? And how had they remained invisible for so long? The answer would require a revolution in ancient DNA technology and challenge everything we thought we knew about human migration patterns. Because what the scientists discovered next would prove that the Denisovans weren't just another extinct human group. They were genetic innovators whose evolutionary solutions continue to benefit millions of people today. The initial publication of the Denisovan discovery in Nature sent shockwaves through multiple scientific disciplines. Paleoanthropologists scrambled to re-examine their collections, searching for fossils that might have been misidentified or overlooked. Geneticists began developing new techniques for extracting and analyzing ancient DNA from even more degraded specimens. Archaeologists started re-evaluating sites across Asia, looking for evidence of this previously unknown human population. But perhaps the most profound impact was on our understanding of human diversity itself. The discovery that modern human populations carried substantial genetic contributions from an extinct human species forced scientists to reconsider fundamental assumptions about evolution, extinction, and the nature of species boundaries. But this revelation was only the tip of the iceberg. 2 years after the initial discovery, Dr. Pablo's laboratory had extracted enough nuclear DNA to attempt something unprecedented in paleoanthropology, sequencing the complete genome of an unknown human species from a single finger bone. The technical challenges were staggering. Ancient DNA is fragmented, contaminated, and degraded. Most samples yield only tiny fragments of genetic information, like trying to reconstruct a novel from scattered letters. But the Denisova Cave specimen was extraordinary. The permafrost-like conditions had preserved DNA quality that shouldn't have existed in a 50,000-year-old bone. When computational biologist Dr. Martin Kircher began assembling the genetic puzzle, he found himself staring at the highest quality ancient genome ever recovered. The results, published in Nature on December 22, 2010, sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The Denisovan genome wasn't just complete. It was revealing secrets about human evolution that no one had predicted. This wasn't simply another branch on the human family tree. It was evidence of a parallel evolutionary experiment that had produced remarkable genetic innovations. We were seeing adaptations that were millions of years in the making, Dr. Reich would later reflect. The Denisovans had solved evolutionary problems that modern humans were still struggling with. The genome revealed a population that had diverged from the modern human lineage approximately 765,000 years ago, then spent hundreds of millennia adapting to some of the most challenging environments on Earth. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. As the team began comparing Denisovan DNA to modern human populations, they discovered something that defied conventional wisdom about human migration and evolution. The genetic legacy of the supposedly extinct population was thriving in people alive today. Melanesians, people from Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and other Pacific populations, carried between 4 and 6% Denisovan ancestry in their nuclear DNA. This was higher than the Neanderthal component in most European populations. Somehow, Denisovans had contributed substantially to the genetic makeup of people living thousands of miles from the Siberian cave, where their remains were found. Dr. Mark Stoneking from the Max Planck Institute described the moment of realization. We knew immediately that we were looking at evidence of interbreeding, but the geographic distribution made no sense. How did genes from Siberian hominins end up in Pacific Islanders? The answer required reconstructing one of the most complex migration stories in human history. As modern humans expanded out of Africa between 60 and 70,000 years ago, they encountered multiple hominin populations across Eurasia. The Denisovans weren't confined to Siberia. They had established populations across a vast range stretching from the Altai Mountains to Southeast Asia and beyond. Genetic analysis revealed at least 3 distinct episodes of interbreeding between modern humans and different Denisovan populations. The first occurred in mainland Asia, contributing to the ancestry of East Asian populations. The second happened in Southeast Asia, affecting the ancestors of modern Melanesians and Australian Aboriginals. A third episode may have occurred in the Philippines, influencing island populations across the region. But the Denisovan genetic contribution wasn't random. As researchers mapped specific genetic variants, they discovered that many Denisovan gene variants have been actively selected for in modern human populations. This meant that Denisovan genes weren't just surviving as evolutionary baggage. They were providing active benefits to their human carriers. Dr. Emilia Huerta Sanchez from the University of California, Berkeley, made one of the most significant discoveries while studying high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations. Tibetans possess a remarkable ability to thrive at altitudes above 14,000 feet, where most people would suffer severe altitude sickness or death. The genetic basis for this adaptation had puzzled scientists for years. When Huerta Sanchez analyzed the EPS1 gene, crucial for regulating oxygen metabolism at high altitudes, she found something extraordinary. The version of EPS1 that allows Tibetans to thrive in thin air didn't match the variant found in other modern human populations. Instead, It was nearly identical to the version found in the Denisovan genome. It was like finding a molecular fossil. Huerta Sanchez explained, the Denisovans had evolved as high-altitude adaptation over hundreds of thousands of years, and modern humans inherited it through interbreeding. This single genetic gift allowed Tibetan populations to colonize the highest plateau on Earth, establishing civilizations at altitudes that would be uninhabitable for most humans. The implications were staggering. Denisovans weren't just another extinct human group. They were evolutionary innovators whose genetic solutions were still being used by millions of people today. Their DNA contained the blueprints for surviving in extreme environments, processing oxygen more efficiently, and thriving in ecological niches that standard human physiology couldn't handle. But the high-altitude adaptation was just the beginning. As researchers continued analyzing Denisovan genetic contributions, they found evidence of immune system enhancements, metabolic improvements, and neurological variants that might have contributed to cognitive abilities. The Denisovans hadn't just survived. They had excelled in ways that continue to benefit their genetic descendants. The finger bone from Denisova Cave wasn't just preserving the remains of an extinct population. It was a genetic time capsule containing evolutionary solutions that had taken hundreds of thousands of years to develop. Modern humans hadn't just replaced the Denisovans. They had inherited their evolutionary achievements and carried them across the globe. But if Denisovans possessed such remarkable adaptations, what happened to them? Why did they vanish from the fossil record while their genes lived on in modern human populations? The answer would challenge everything we understood about human evolution and the nature of species extinction itself. Imagine Anya, a Denisovan woman living 45,000 years ago in what would one day become the Philippines. She stands barely 5 feet tall, but her lungs process oxygen with an efficiency that would astonish modern physiologists. Her hands, broader than those of contemporary humans, fashion obsidian blades with a precision that speaks of countless generations of accumulated knowledge. She doesn't know it, but the genetic innovations flowing through her bloodstream will one day allow her descendants to thrive on the highest plateau on Earth. We can glimpse Anya's world through the archaeological records scattered across Eurasia. At Denisova Cave, Layer 11 preserved the material culture of her people. Sophisticated stone tools that required advanced planning and technical skill. These weren't crude choppers, but carefully crafted implements that demonstrate abstract thinking and cultural transmission across generations. Dr. Anatoly Derevienko, who led excavations at Denisova Cave for over 3 decades, described finding evidence of behaviors that challenged assumptions about archaic human capabilities. We discovered not just tools, but jewelry, he explained in a 2011 interview. Carved bracelets made from chlorite, polished to a mirror finish. The level of craftsmanship exceeded anything we'd seen from contemporary Neanderthal sites. The bracelet, dated between 65 and 70,000 years ago, required drilling techniques that weren't thought to exist in the archaeological record until much later. The holes were perfectly circular, indicating the use of high-speed drilling with specialized tools. The polishing was so sophisticated that it created a lustrous surface indistinguishable from modern jewelry-making techniques. But Anya's people weren't confined to Siberian caves. Genetic evidence suggests the Denisovan population stretched across a geographic range that dwarfed any other archaic human group, from the Tibetan Plateau to the islands of Southeast Asia, from the steppes of Central Asia to the tropical forests of Indonesia. Denisovan communities adapted to ecological niches that span the full spectrum of Eurasian environments. Consider Badu, living in the limestone caves of northern Luzon in the Philippines 35,000 years ago. His community had mastered maritime technology sufficient to reach islands that were never connected to the mainland, even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age. This required not just boats, but navigation skills, weather prediction, and the cultural knowledge to maintain seafaring traditions across generations. The genetic legacy of Batu's people survives today in Philippine populations who carry distinct Denisovan ancestry markers. But recent archaeological discoveries suggest their technological achievements went far beyond simple island hopping. At Altai Cave, researchers have uncovered evidence of sophisticated butchering techniques, fire control, and stone tool technologies that parallel contemporary modern human innovations. Dr. Floor in Detroit, who led the Altai Cave excavations, described finding cut marks on rhinoceros bones that indicated systematic dismemberment and marrow extraction. These weren't random scavenging activities, Detroit observed. The cut patterns show planned, efficient processing of large game animals. It suggests cooperative hunting strategies and advanced food-sharing behaviors. Meanwhile, in the highlands of Tibet, we can imagine Pemba, a Denisovan hunter living at altitudes above 16,000 feet. Her EPS1 gene variant allows her blood to carry oxygen with an efficiency that modern humans can barely achieve with months of acclimatization. She hunts blue sheep across valleys where the air contains half the oxygen of sea level, moving with an endurance that seems superhuman by contemporary standards. Pemba's genetic legacy would prove crucial to human evolution. When modern human populations began expanding into high-altitude regions, those who inherited Denisovan EPS1 variants could establish permanent settlements in areas that remain uninhabitable for other human groups. The Denisovan adaptation became the foundation for Tibetan civilization, enabling the development of high-altitude agriculture, trade routes, and cultural systems that persist today. But perhaps the most poignant glimpse into Denisovan life comes from the cave itself. In Layer 21 of Denisova Cave, archaeologists discovered something remarkable: evidence of interspecies interaction. Stone tools characteristic of three different human groups, Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans, appear in the same archaeological layers. This wasn't just parallel occupation. Chemical analysis of the sediments revealed overlapping habitation periods when multiple human species shared the same cave system. Dr. Katerina Duca, who conducted the chronological analysis, described finding evidence of cultural exchange that went beyond mere coexistence. We're seeing tool technologies that appear to be hybrids, combining techniques characteristic of different human groups. Imagine encounters between these different human species, language barriers, cultural differences, but also moments of recognition. The shared experience of making fire, crafting tools, raising children in a dangerous world. Genetic evidence proves that these meetings sometimes resulted in offspring, hybrid children who carried the combined genetic heritage of multiple human lineages. The Denisovan woman whose finger bone was discovered in Layer 11 might have been one of these hybrid individuals. Her genetic signature suggests ancestors from at least two distinct hominin populations. She wasn't just a Denisovan. She was a living testament to the complex web of relationships that characterized late Pleistocene human evolution. These weren't simple, isolated populations competing for resources. They were interconnected communities with sophisticated technologies, artistic traditions, and the cognitive flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing environments. The Denisovans developed solutions to evolutionary challenges that modern humans still depend on today. But their very success may have contained the seeds of their eventual disappearance. As modern human populations expanded across Eurasia, they didn't necessarily replace other human groups through competition or conflict. Instead, they absorbed them through interbreeding, preserving their genetic innovations while diluting their distinct cultural identity. The Denisovans didn't vanish. They merged into the expanding river of human genetic diversity, their evolutionary achievements becoming part of our shared heritage. 60,000 years ago, the Denisovans had achieved something that modern science is still trying to fully comprehend. They had become the apex survivors of Ice Age Eurasia. Their populations dominated ecological niches from Arctic tundra to tropical islands, from wind-swept steppes to oxygen-thin mountain plateaus. They weren't just surviving in these environments. They were thriving in ways that redefined the boundaries of human biological possibility. Dr. Rasmus Nielsen from the University of California, Berkeley, who has spent over a decade analyzing Denisovan genetic adaptations, describes their evolutionary strategy as precision engineering at the molecular level. Unlike modern humans, who rely primarily on technology and culture to overcome environmental challenges, the Denisovans had evolved biological solutions that made them perfectly suited to extreme conditions. The crown jewel of their evolutionary achievements was their mastery of high-altitude survival. The EPS1 gene variant that modern Tibetans inherited from Denisovans represents one of the most sophisticated biological adaptations ever documented. This genetic innovation doesn't just help with oxygen processing. It fundamentally rewires human physiology to function efficiently in low-oxygen environments. Dr. Cynthia Beale from Case Western Reserve University, who has studied high-altitude human adaptation for over 30 years, explains the magnitude of this achievement. Most humans experiencing chronic hypoxia develop polycythemia. Their bodies produce excessive red blood cells trying to compensate for oxygen scarcity. This eventually leads to blood viscosity problems, heart strain, and death. The Denisovan EPS1 variant prevents this maladaptive response while maintaining oxygen delivery efficiency. It's evolutionarily brilliant. But high-altitude adaptation was just one facet of Denisovan biological superiority. Their genetic toolkit included innovations that addressed multiple environmental challenges simultaneously. Analysis of ancient pathogen DNA from Denisova Cave sediments reveals that these populations encountered viral and bacterial challenges that would devastate modern human communities. Yet they developed immune system enhancements that provided broad-spectrum pathogen resistance. Dr. Louise Quintana Mercy from the Pasteur Institute in Paris has identified multiple Denisovan-derived immune system variants that persist in modern human populations. We're finding Denisovan genetic contributions in toll-like receptors, major histocompatibility complex genes, and antimicrobial peptide systems. Quintana Mercy explains, these aren't random genetic drift. They represent active selection for enhanced pathogen resistance that continues to benefit modern humans today. The scope of Denisovan technological achievement becomes clear when examining their material culture. At Denisova Cave, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of manufacturing techniques that weren't thought to exist until tens of thousands of years later. The chlorite bracelet represents just the tip of the technological iceberg. Recent excavations have revealed sophisticated bone and antler working, advanced fire control systems, and stone tool technologies that required multi-step planning and specialized knowledge transmission. Dr. Shannon McFerrin from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, who analyzed the Denisovan tool assemblages, describes finding evidence of technological systems that parallel the complexity of early Upper Paleolithic modern human innovations. This included microblade production and standardized tool forms that require precise techniques and formal learning systems. The uniformity across the Denisovan sites indicates cultural traditions that maintain technological standards across vast distances. Perhaps most remarkably, Denisovans developed maritime technologies, enabling them to reach islands never connected to the mainland. Genetic evidence proves Denisovan populations reached the Philippines, Melanesia, and possibly Australia during periods requiring deliberate ocean crossings of 30 to 60 miles. Dr. Michael O'Brien from the University of Missouri considers Denisovan seafaring capabilities one of the most underappreciated technological achievements of the Pleistocene. The cognitive demands of celestial navigation, weather prediction, boat construction, and provisioning for multi-day voyages required sophisticated cultural systems and technical knowledge. But the Denisovans' greatest achievement may have been their genetic diversity management. Unlike many archaic populations that became isolated and extinct due to inbreeding depression, Denisovans maintained gene flow across enormous distances. Genetic analysis reveals long-distance migration and population mixing that prevented the bottlenecks that doomed other hominin groups. Dr. Montgomery Slatkin from UC Berkeley explains, their genetic structure suggests a metapopulation system, interconnected communities that exchange individuals regularly enough to maintain genetic health. This represents sophisticated population management that probably involved cultural practices specifically designed to prevent inbreeding. This system may explain how Denisovans maintain their biological innovations across such vast geographic ranges. Rather than evolving into isolated subspecies, they preserved a core genetic toolkit while allowing local populations to fine-tune their biology for specific environments. Evidence suggests that at their peak, Denisovan populations numbered in the hundreds of thousands, possibly exceeding contemporary modern human populations in many Eurasian regions. They have become a truly successful, widespread, technologically sophisticated human species. Their domain stretched from the Arctic Ocean to the Indian Ocean, from Pacific islands to European steppes. They had solved biological puzzles of high-altitude survival, pathogen resistance, and environmental adaptation that continue challenging modern humans today. They were the masters of their world, but their very success created conditions for their ultimate transformation. As modern human populations expanded from Africa, they encountered not primitive competitors, but sophisticated societies with evolutionary advantages that modern humans needed to survive in unfamiliar environments. The stage was set for one of the most complex episodes of interspecies interaction in human history. By 40,000 years ago, cracks were beginning to appear in the Denisovan Empire. Their greatest strength, the genetic innovations that made them masters of extreme environments, had become an evolutionary trap. The very biological specializations that allowed them to thrive in specific ecological niches were making them vulnerable to a more generalized competitor. Modern humans equipped with advanced technology and cultural flexibility. Dr. John Hawks from the University of Wisconsin, who has extensively modeled late Pleistocene human population dynamics, describes the Denisovan predicament as the specialist dilemma. Their biological solutions to environmental challenges were so precisely calibrated that they struggled to adapt when conditions changed rapidly. Meanwhile, modern humans were developing technological and cultural solutions that could be modified and transmitted much faster than genetic adaptations. The first signs of Denisovan decline appear in the archaeological record around 45,000 years ago. At Denisova Cave, Layer 10 shows a marked change in tool assemblages. The sophisticated Denisovan technological traditions begin to show influences from modern human innovations. But rather than technological advancement, this may represent the beginning of cultural disruption. Dr. Vivian Sloan, who led the most recent genetic analysis of Denisova Cave remains, made a discovery that illuminated the complexity of this period. In Layer 9, she found evidence of something unprecedented, a first-generation hybrid individual with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father. The 13-year-old girl, nicknamed Denny, represents direct evidence of interbreeding between archaic human species during this crucial period. Denny's existence proves that interbreeding wasn't rare, Sloan explains. The probability of finding a first-generation hybrid in our small sample suggests that mixed ancestry was actually quite common during this period. We're looking at populations that were actively interacting and producing offspring on a regular basis. But genetic analysis reveals that these hybrid populations face significant challenges. Many Denisovan-specific adaptations, particularly those involving complex gene regulation systems, didn't function properly in mixed genetic backgrounds. The precision-engineered biological systems that made pure Denisovans so successful became unstable when combined with genetic variants from other human lineages. Dr. Graham Coop from UC Davis, who has studied hybrid fitness in archaic human populations, explains the genetic problem. Denisovans had evolved integrated genetic systems where multiple genes work together to produce specific adaptations. When you introduce genetic variants from other populations, you can disrupt these finely tuned systems. Many hybrid individuals may have suffered reduced fitness as a result. This phenomenon, known as outbreeding depression, may have created a genetic feedback loop that accelerated Denisovan population decline. As modern human populations expanded across Eurasia, they didn't simply replace Denisovans through competition. Instead, they triggered a complex process of genetic integration that gradually dissolved distinct Denisovan populations through interbreeding. The process wasn't uniform across their range. In some regions, particularly high-altitude areas where Denisovan biological adaptations provided clear advantages, hybrid populations thrived and eventually became the ancestors of modern Tibetan and Sherpa communities. But in most environments, the advantages of Denisovan specializations were outweighed by the disadvantages of genetic incompatibility. Archaeological evidence from this period tells a story of rapid cultural change that may have overwhelmed traditional Denisovan societies. Modern humans brought new hunting technologies, social organization systems, and symbolic behaviors that spread rapidly through contact networks. The sophisticated but conservative Denisovan cultural traditions struggled to compete with more flexible modern human innovations. At Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau, researchers have found evidence of this cultural transition. Early layers contain typical Denisovan stone tool assemblages and evidence of the specialized high-altitude hunting strategies that had sustained Denisovan populations for thousands of years. But around 40,000 years ago, the archaeological signature changes dramatically. Dr. Dongju Zhang from Lantau University, who led excavations at Baishia, describes finding a complete technological revolution in a very short time period. Within a few thousand years, we see the introduction of modern human tool types, new hunting strategies, and different approaches to resource management. It suggests rapid cultural displacement or assimilation. But the most troubling evidence comes from genetic analysis of late-period Denisovan remains. DNA extracted from specimens dating to between 35 and 40,000 years ago shows signs of severe population bottlenecks. Genetic diversity within Denisovan populations had crashed to levels that typically precede species extinction. Dr. Love Dahlén from the Swedish Museum of Natural History, who has studied genetic diversity in extinct megafauna, recognizes a pattern. We see similar genetic signatures in mammoth populations just before they disappear from most of their range. Reduced genetic diversity, increased inbreeding, and loss of adaptive variants. The Denisovan populations were entering what we call an extinction vortex. The extinction vortex is a self-reinforcing process where small populations lose genetic diversity through random drift, which reduces their ability to adapt to environmental changes, which further reduces population size, creating a downward spiral toward extinction. For highly specialized populations like the Denisovans, this process could be catastrophically rapid. Climate change may have accelerated the crisis. Around 40,000 years ago, Europe and Asia experienced dramatic environmental fluctuations associated with Heinrich Event 4, a massive ice sheet collapse that altered weather patterns across the northern hemisphere. The specialized ecological niches that supported Denisovan populations fragmented or disappeared entirely. Modern humans, with their technological and cultural flexibility, could adapt to these rapid environmental changes by modifying their behavior, tools, and social organization. But Denisovans, whose survival strategies were encoded in their genes, couldn't evolve fast enough to keep pace with the changing world. The stage was set for the final act of Denisovan history, not a dramatic extinction event, but a slow genetic dissolution as their populations merged with the expanding tide of modern humanity. Their biological innovations would survive, but their cultural identity and distinct evolutionary trajectory would be lost forever. The genetic time bomb that had made them masters of their world was about to detonate, transforming them from a distinct human species into a ghostly presence in the DNA of their successors. To understand how the Denisovans dominated Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years, we must reconstruct the intricate biological and cultural systems that made their success possible. Their survival wasn't just about individual genetic advantages. It was about complex, integrated adaptations that function like a perfectly orchestrated biological symphony. At the molecular level, Denisovan physiology represented a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Dr. Anna Di Rienzo from the University of Chicago, who has spent over 15 years analyzing high-altitude adaptations, describes the Denisovan biological system as the most sophisticated environmental adaptation we've documented in human evolution. Their EPS1 gene variant didn't work in isolation. It was part of an integrated network of genetic modifications that included changes to hemoglobin production, blood vessel formation, and cellular metabolism. The complete Denisovan high-altitude adaptation involved at least 12 different genes working in concert. EPS1 regulated production of erythropoietin, the hormone that controls red blood cell production. But Denisovans also possess modified versions of genes controlling nitric oxide production, which affected blood vessel dilation, and variants that enhance mitochondrial efficiency at the cellular level. Dr. Tatum Simonson from UC San Diego, who has mapped these genetic networks, explains, modern humans try to adapt to high altitude typically develop one or two compensatory mechanisms: increase red blood cell production or enhance lung capacity. But these solutions create their own problems. Denisovans had evolved a complete biological system that maintained oxygen delivery efficiency without the negative side effects that plague other high-altitude populations. This genetic integration extended to their immune systems. Analysis of ancient pathogen DNA from Denisova Cave reveals that these populations encountered viral and bacterial challenges that would devastate modern communities. Pandemic-level diseases that sweep through contemporary human populations appear to have been endemic in Denisovan territories, yet their populations remained stable for millennia. The secret lay in their approach to immune system diversity. Unlike modern humans, who rely on cultural behaviors like quarantine and medical treatment to manage disease outbreaks, Denisovans had evolved biological resistance to multiple pathogen families simultaneously. Their major histocompatibility complex genes showed unprecedented diversity, providing broad-spectrum pathogen recognition capabilities. Dr. Peter Parham from Stanford University, who studies immune system evolution, describes the Denisovan immune system as evolutionary overkill in the best possible sense. They possess immune receptor variants that could recognize and respond to pathogen families that modern humans still struggle with today. It was biological insurance against epidemic disease. But the most remarkable aspect of Denisovan survival architecture was their cultural transmission systems. Archaeological evidence suggests they had developed formal education programs for passing complex technical knowledge between generations. The consistency of tool production techniques across vast geographic distances indicates standardized learning protocols that ensured technological knowledge didn't degrade over time. At Denisova Cave, researchers have found evidence of structured learning environments. Specific areas of the cave contain concentrations of stone napping debris that suggest dedicated teaching spaces where experienced toolmakers trained apprentices. The waste flake patterns indicate systematic instruction in advanced techniques rather than trial and error learning. Dr. Metin Aaron from Kent State University, who studies prehistoric learning systems, explains, "We're seeing evidence of formal apprenticeship programs that parallel those found in historical craft guilds. Masters working with students through standardized curricula, quality control systems, and graduated skill development. This isn't accidental. It represents sophisticated cultural institutions designed to preserve technical knowledge. This educational system extended beyond tool production. Denisovan populations appear to have maintained oral tradition networks that preserved environmental knowledge across generations. Genetic evidence of their successful maritime expansions suggests they possess detailed knowledge of weather patterns, ocean currents, and celestial navigation techniques that were passed down through formal teaching lineages. The Denisovan approach to resource management was equally sophisticated. Rather than following the modern human pattern of intensive exploitation followed by migration to new territories, Denisovans developed sustainable harvesting strategies that maintain ecosystem stability over geological time periods. Archaeological evidence from multiple Denisovan sites shows consistent patterns of resource rotation and landscape management. At Baishia Karst Cave, faunal analysis reveals that Denisovan hunters systematically rotated between different prey species to prevent overexploitation of any single population. Dr. Jean-Jacques Hublin from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, who analyzed hunting patterns from multiple Denisovan sites, describes finding evidence of ecological wisdom that took thousands of years to develop. They weren't just hunting whatever was available. They were managing entire ecosystems to ensure long-term sustainability. This included controlled burning programs that maintained grassland habitats for large herbivores, seasonal migration patterns that allowed animal populations to recover, and sophisticated cache systems that stored surplus resources for lean periods. The Denisovans had essentially become ecosystem engineers, shaping their environments to maximize long-term productivity. Their social organization systems were equally advanced. Genetic analysis suggests that Denisovan communities maintained carefully managed breeding networks that prevented inbreeding while preserving beneficial genetic variants. This required social institutions capable of tracking genetic relationships across multiple generations and geographic regions. The approaching collision with modern human populations would test every aspect of this carefully evolved survival architecture, revealing both its extraordinary strengths and its fatal weaknesses. 35,000 years ago, something unprecedented happened in human evolutionary history. The Denisovans, masters of Eurasia for over 500,000 years, began vanishing from the fossil record with a speed that defies conventional explanations of extinction. This wasn't the gradual decline typical of species facing environmental pressure, nor was it the dramatic collapse associated with catastrophic events. Instead, it was something far more mysterious, a genetic dissolution that would leave scientists puzzling over the mechanisms of species disappearance for decades. The last confirmed Denisovan remains from Denisova Cave date to approximately 45,000 years ago. After that point, the archaeological signature changes dramatically. Dr. Bence Viola from the University of Toronto, who has analyzed the final layers of Denisovan occupation, describes the transition as archaeologically invisible but genetically explosive. We stopped finding distinctly Denisovan remains, Viola explains, but we start seeing evidence of massive genetic mixing. The humans occupying these sites after 40,000 years ago carry substantial Denisovan ancestry, but they're not Denisovans anymore. There's something new, hybrid populations that represent the genetic fusion of multiple human lineages. This pattern repeats across Eurasia, from the Altai Mountains to the Tibetan Plateau, from the caves of Southeast Asia to the islands of Melanesia. The final period of Denisovan presence is marked not by evidence of conflict or environmental collapse, but by genetic signatures of intensive interbreeding with modern human populations. Dr. Janet Kelso from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology has reconstructed the timeline of this genetic mixing through advanced ancient DNA analysis. Her research reveals that the Denisovan disappearance occurred in waves, with different populations merging with modern humans at different times and in different ways. The process wasn't uniform, Kelso notes. In some regions, particularly areas where Denisovan biological adaptations provided clear advantages, the genetic mixing favored preservation of Denisovan variants. But in most environments, modern human genetic variants became dominant, and Denisovan-specific traits gradually disappeared through genetic dilution. The mechanisms behind this extraordinary disappearance challenge traditional models of species extinction. Unlike the Neanderthals, who appear to have been gradually outcompete and replaced by modern humans, the Denisovans seem to have been absorbed through a process that was both more rapid and more complete. Dr. Montgomery Slatkin's population genetic models suggest that the speed of Denisovan genetic dissolution required specific demographic conditions. You need relatively small Denisovan populations encountering much larger modern human groups, Slatkin explains. But you also need cultural conditions that promote interbreeding rather than conflict. This suggests that the final interactions between Denisovans and modern humans were characterized by integration rather than competition. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Sites from the crucial period between 40 and 30,000 years ago show technological mixing that indicates cultural exchange rather than replacement. Modern human tool types appear alongside Denisovan techniques, creating hybrid technological traditions that suggest collaborative rather than competitive relationships. At Tam Pa Ling Cave in Laos, researchers have found human remains that show morphological features intermediate between modern humans and archaic populations. Dr. Fabrice Demeter, who led the excavation, describes these individuals as living representatives of the human evolutionary transition. They're not quite modern humans in the contemporary sense, but they're not archaic humans either. They represent the biological fusion that was occurring across Asia during this period. But the most dramatic evidence of Denisovan genetic dissolution comes from analysis of contemporary DNA. Populations across Asia, Melanesia, and Australia carry Denisovan genetic signatures that are far more complex than simple interbreeding would predict. Instead of uniform Denisovan ancestry percentages, different populations carry different suites of Denisovan genetic variants, suggesting multiple episodes of mixing with genetically distinct Denisovan groups. Dr. David Reich's laboratory has identified at least 3 separate Denisovan lineages that contributed to modern human ancestry. We're not looking at a single interbreeding event, Reich explains. We're seeing evidence of sustained genetic exchange between modern humans and multiple Denisovan populations over thousands of years. It suggests that Denisovan genetic dissolution was a gradual process that played out differently in different regions. The most poignant evidence of this process comes from the individuals themselves. At Denisova Cave, Layer 9 contains the remains of Deni, the 13-year-old girl with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father. But genetic analysis reveals that Deni's Denisovan father also carried modern human ancestry, suggesting that by this period, pure Denisovan populations may have already been rare. Deni represents the complexity of late Pleistocene human interactions, explains Dr. Vivian Slan. She's not just a hybrid between two archaic human species. Her genetic signature suggests that her ancestors have been participating in genetic exchanges with multiple human lineages for generations. The boundaries between human species were becoming increasingly blurred. This genetic blurring may explain why Denisovans disappeared so completely from the fossil record, while their genetic legacy remains so strong in modern populations. Rather than being replaced by modern humans, they were absorbed into an expanding network of hybrid populations that gradually lost their distinct Denisovan identity while preserving their most valuable genetic innovations. The process was irreversible. Once Denisovan populations fell below critical thresholds, genetic drift and continued mixing made it impossible for distinct traits to be maintained. Within a few thousand years, the last recognizably Denisovan individuals had vanished, leaving only genetic echoes. The Great Disappearance wasn't extinction. It was a transformation that would reshape human evolution itself. In the immediate aftermath of the Denisovan disappearance, their genetic legacy began reshaping human populations across the globe in ways that wouldn't be fully understood until the advent of modern genomics. The hybrid populations that emerged from this extraordinary period of genetic mixing carried evolutionary innovations that would prove crucial to human survival and expansion into some of Earth's most challenging environments. Dr. Sarah Tishkoff from the University of Pennsylvania, who has studied human genetic diversity for over 20 years, describes the post-Denisovan period as the most dramatic example of adaptive introgression in human evolution. Modern humans didn't just inherit random genetic variants from Denisovans. They specifically preserved the variants that provided survival advantages in new environments. The most immediate beneficiaries were the populations that would eventually become modern Tibetans and Sherpas. Around 30,000 years ago, as the last recognizably Denisovan populations merged with modern human groups, their high-altitude adaptations became concentrated in populations expanding onto the Tibetan Plateau. This wasn't accidental. The Denisovan EPS1 variant provided such a powerful survival advantage at high altitude that it was strongly selected for in these environments. Dr. Rasmus Nielsen's research team has calculated that the Denisovan high-altitude adaptation spread through Tibetan populations with extraordinary speed. We're looking at one of the fastest known examples of positive selection in human evolution, Nielsen explains. Within just a few thousand years, the Denisovan EPS1 variant went from being present in a small percentage of the population to being nearly universal among Tibetans. The selective advantage was so strong that it overwhelmed normal genetic drift. But the Tibetan Plateau was just the beginning. As modern human populations carrying Denisovan genetic variants spread across Asia, they encountered new environments where other Denisovan adaptations proved advantageous. Island populations in Southeast Asia and Melanesia preserved Denisovan immune system variants that provided resistance to tropical diseases. Arctic populations retained metabolic adaptations that enhanced cold tolerance and efficient fat processing. The immediate demographic impact was staggering. Populations carrying beneficial Denisovan variants experienced rapid expansion as they colonized previously uninhabitable regions. Dr. Laurent Escoffier from the University of Bern has modeled these population dynamics and found evidence of demographic explosions coinciding with the spread of Denisovan genetic variants. We see population growth rates that are extraordinary for prehistoric societies. Escoffier notes, groups carrying Denisovan high-altitude adaptations could establish permanent settlements in mountain regions that had been essentially uninhabitable for earlier human populations. Similarly, populations with Denisovan immune variants could maintain stable communities in tropical regions where other groups suffered devastating mortality from endemic diseases. Archaeological evidence from this period reflects these demographic changes. Between 30 and 20,000 years ago, human settlements appear at altitudes and in environments that show no previous evidence of permanent occupation. The Tibetan Plateau, the high Andes, Arctic regions, and remote Pacific islands all show evidence of human colonization during this crucial period. At Chusang, a site on the Tibetan Plateau at 14,700 feet above sea level, archaeologists have found evidence of permanent human occupation dating to around 30,000 years ago. Dr. Mark Aldenfer from UC Merced, who led the excavation, describes the site as representing the first successful high-altitude civilization in human history. The tool assemblages, architectural features, and subsistence strategies at Chusang show clear evidence of long-term adaptation to extreme altitude. Aldenfer explains, these weren't temporary hunting camps or seasonal occupations. This was a permanent settlement by people who had solved the biological challenges of high-altitude survival. Similar patterns emerge across the Pacific. Between 35 and 25,000 years ago, human populations successfully colonized island chains that required sophisticated maritime technology and navigation skills. Genetic analysis reveals that many of these pioneering populations carried substantial Denisovan ancestry, suggesting that Denisovan adaptations may have contributed to their seafaring success. Dr. Peter Bellwood from Australian National University, who has studied Pacific colonization patterns for decades, argues that the timing of successful Pacific expansion coincides precisely with the period when Denisovan genetic variants were spreading through Asian populations. It's possible that Denisovan contributions to metabolism, immune function, or even cognitive abilities played a role in enabling these extraordinary maritime achievements. But the impact of Denisovan genetic legacy extended beyond simple environmental adaptation. Recent research suggests that some Denisovan variants may have influenced cognitive development and neural function in modern human populations. Dr. Alison Mowotri from UC San Diego has identified Denisovan-derived genetic variants that affect brain development and may contribute to enhanced spatial reasoning abilities. The social and cultural implications were equally profound. The hybrid populations that emerged from Denisovan genetic mixing weren't just biologically different from their ancestors. They possessed combinations of traits that enabled entirely new forms of social organization and cultural expression. High-altitude populations could maintain larger, more stable communities than had been possible in mountain environments previously. This enabled the development of complex trade networks, specialized craft production, and cultural institutions that required sustained social cooperation. The genetic foundation provided by Denisovan adaptations became the biological basis for some of humanity's most remarkable civilizations. Contemporary accounts from early explorers and anthropologists document the extraordinary capabilities of populations with strong Denisovan genetic heritage. Tibetan and Sherpa communities routinely performed physical feats at altitude that seemed impossible to lowland visitors. Pacific Island navigators demonstrated spatial reasoning and environmental awareness that appeared almost supernatural to European observers. The immediate aftermath of Denisovan genetic integration had created human populations with capabilities that exceeded anything seen in previous human evolution. In less than 10,000 years, modern humans carrying Denisovan genetic innovations had colonized environments from the highest mountains to the most remote ocean islands, establishing the foundation for civilizations that would persist for millennia. But this was just the beginning of the Denisovan legacy's impact on human history. Today, as you read these words, Denisovan DNA is flowing through your bloodstream. If you're of Tibetan descent, up to 5% of your genome carries the genetic signature of these ancient people. If your ancestors came from Papua New Guinea or the Philippines, that percentage might be even higher. Even if you trace your lineage to Europe or Africa, cutting-edge genetic analysis is revealing trace amounts of Denisovan ancestry in populations that were thought to be genetically isolated from these ancient Asian peoples. The Denisovans didn't simply vanish 50,000 years ago. They became us. Their genetic innovations continue to solve biological problems that modern medicine struggles to address. Tibetan populations carrying Denisovan EPS1 variants thrive at altitudes where most humans would die within hours. Pacific Islanders with Denisovan immune system enhancements resist tropical diseases that devastate other populations. Arctic communities possess metabolic adaptations inherited from these ancient people that allow them to maintain health on traditional diets that would be nutritionally impossible for most modern humans. Dr. David Reich, reflecting on 2 decades of ancient DNA research, puts the Denisovan legacy in perspective. We're not just studying extinct human species, we're studying the genetic foundations of modern human diversity, the biological capabilities that allowed humans to colonize every environment on Earth, from the highest mountains to the most remote islands, were purchased with genetic innovations inherited from people we're only now beginning to understand. But the Denisovan influence extends far beyond biology. The populations that inherited their genetic legacy became the pioneers who pushed the boundaries of human possibility. They were the first to establish permanent civilizations above 14,000 feet, the first to navigate thousands of miles of open ocean, using only traditional knowledge, the first to develop sustainable resource management systems in extreme environments. This wasn't just about survival in extreme environments. It was about expanding the very definition of what it means to be human. The Denisovans pushed the boundaries of biological possibility, developing genetic solutions to environmental challenges that seemed insurmountable. When modern humans inherited these innovations through interbreeding, they gained access to evolutionary achievements that had taken hundreds of thousands of years to perfect. This wasn't just about prehistoric biology. It was about the fundamental creativity of evolution itself. And even today, it still echoes in the DNA of nearly 4 billion people who carry the genetic legacy of humanity's lost super race.